In this video, I'm going to show you the secret technique I learned which allowed me to overcome the worst experiences of depression. Hi, welcome back to Mental Health Power. So when I refer to the worst symptoms of depression, what I'm talking about are things like feeling extreme apathy. So this is long-term experiences, so feeling apathetic, having no energy to do things. So you imagine if somebody is apathetic, so they start not seeing any point to do anything, they lose a sense of purpose in their life. You can imagine that this then creates no energy from within. They have no more energy no motivation to do things. This also means that they find it almost impossible to experience pleasure from life, from doing normal everyday things or the things that they used to enjoy. This then often leads people who are having these experiences of the worst symptoms of depression to also then start to neglect themselves, so they stop being able to take care of themselves, and also they stop being able to carry on with their normal responsibilities of taking care of other people or whatever other things that they normally would do. This then often leads to really very low self-esteem. So because they're not meeting their own expectations or their previous expectations that they had, either from other people or from themselves, their self-esteem can drop really, really far down, which only adds to the lack of energy and feeling apathetic. This puts them in a state of extreme negativity. So when you're in that state, just everything that you do, everything you experience, seems extremely just horrible and negative. So you can imagine this leads to extremely negative thinking and even can lead to suicidal thoughts. So because the experience becomes just so overwhelming, as in psychologically with the thinking is overwhelming and emotionally it becomes just too much, the mind will then start to generate these kind of thoughts as well. And it does this because it's trying to find a way out, trying to find a way to escape the experience. So other things that the mind may do when in this state is it can lead people to want to indulge in what we can call escapist activities or coping mechanisms. So they may turn to things like drinking or food or drugs or binge watching TV or video games, for example, as a way to suppress and to escape the experience, because as you can see, it would be extremely difficult. And this ultimately then leads to a very bleak life experience, and it becomes almost unbearable. So about 10 years ago, this is basically what I experienced for quite a while. So for me, it was because I was experiencing high levels of anxiety and dissociative psychological symptoms, so depersonalisation and derealisation. And so that led to me experiencing a dissociation with my own body and with reality. So I was essentially living in like a non-stop dream. That's what it felt like. Like I was, and I was somebody else in the dream. So you can imagine how that experience would lead to, and in addition to the high levels of anxiety, you can see how it could lead to these kind of experiences. So then, what is this technique, this secret technique that I learned? So before I explain the technique, I need to show you firstly the cycle that I saw within myself back in the day, and I believe that also exists in people who have depression. But if you have severe depression or you're experiencing the worst levels of depression, this is usually the type of cycle that occurs. So if it begins, let's say on this side here, so if you're experiencing the worst levels of depression, it's going to be rooted in powerlessness. So all of these symptoms here, as you can see, pretty much are all related to almost complete powerlessness or hopelessness. But I guess hopelessness and powerlessness are kind of the same thing. And there's also often a lot of guilt as well that can come from that. So when you have that experience, this often then leads to this will lead to then very negative thoughts. So you're having an experience, then your thoughts will reflect that. This then leads to lower mood. So your mood just gets even worse and worse. You feel more and more depressed. That then leads to a very negative perception of reality and of themselves. So their worldview becomes very negative, or even more negative than before. And their own self-image, so their perception of themselves, also then becomes really, really low and very negative. This then becomes overwhelming. So you have the really negative thoughts, the sometimes extreme low moods, and then the very extreme negative perception of themselves and reality. That all becomes very overwhelming. So then the mind will then try and find ways for the person to cope. So then they'll turn to things, as I mentioned, like binge eating, binge drinking, sex, pornography, video game addiction, internet addiction, daydreaming. People can get lost in daydreaming. Having too much sleep as well is a very common one with severe depression, because it's not just because of the lack of energy, it's also because they just need a way to escape from the experience. So sleeping is often the body's way of just coping with the experience to try and survive. And there are essentially probably just an infinite amount of potential coping mechanisms. Whatever the mind can use to escape, and that's available, it will use. And then all that does, once they finish using their coping mechanism, because it hasn't resolved the issue, it just leads back to the state of powerlessness and guilt. Now, if you are stuck in this cycle, what happens is people don't realize that they don't just stay in this cycle, it actually spirals downwards. So while they may think that they're doing fine and they're coping, gradually they're actually spiraling downwards, so things get worse and worse, but they won't actually notice it. So the way that I broke out of this cycle was in understanding that most of these points I couldn't actually control myself necessarily. The one thing I definitely knew I had the most control over were my thoughts. So that's the first point, that the thing you have the most control over in your whole life are your thoughts. Yes, you can move your body. Yes, you can feel a certain way, but it all starts with your thoughts, right? With what's going on in your mind. But then the next thing I understood and came to learn was it's not just the thoughts that lead to this cycle, it's your identification with the thoughts. So if I draw this, so this is an eye. I hope that was clear. This is an eye, and this is really what it is. So this is actually you. So you are awareness. So what I mean is most people think they are their thoughts. Most people are completely identified with whatever thoughts come into their mind. They're identified with whatever feelings they have, whatever perception they have of themselves, so their self-image or their worldview. They are completely identified and believe it's them. And that is basically one of the main root causes of so many problems in the world, especially mental health issues. So the fact that you can observe your thoughts and you can observe your feelings shows that there are two things going on. There's the one observing the experience, and then there's the experience itself. So you can experience thoughts because you are observing them. So this is you. You're this point of awareness here. So what I realized was, because I'm observing thoughts and because I can create thoughts, I came to realize I don't have to believe every thought that comes in, and I can change them. So this is what was happening when I was fully identified with my thoughts. So a negative thought would come in from the guilt and the powerlessness from before. Then I'd have negative thoughts related to that. when I was identified, I would fully believe that these thoughts were me. So then I would then feel a certain way, and I believe that the feeling was also a reflection of me. Then that would affect my self-image, perception of myself, and it would then literally alter my perception of reality. So I would only see negative things, and then the cycle would continue. So the way you break this is you become aware that you are not your thoughts, you are the observer of your thoughts. So this is really you. So then what you have to do is, which is what I did, you question your thoughts. When they come in, treat it like it's being given to you from someone else. So let's say you're in this extreme levels of depression, negativity. Let's say a thought comes in and says like, oh, like you're worthless or something like that. So then you don't have to believe that. It's a choice. So you can observe the thought neutrally, and you can question it. Or what I believe is the most efficient thing to do is you either choose to accept the thought or to reject it. So when a thought comes in and you observe it, you neutrally observe it, you don't judge it, and you can ask yourself, is this helpful for what I need? Is this going to be helpful for me to achieve what I want? So you can simply observe the thought, and you can choose to reject it. So you can simply not believe it, and you can then replace that with something more useful and positive. So let's say someone's experiencing this level of guilt and powerlessness, and then a negative thought is created. So let's just use this to represent negative thought, okay? And let's say the thought says, oh, you're worthless. You can simply just ignore that, and you can choose to not believe it, and then create something more positive, which is, I'm learning. This is a learning process. That's actually a useful thought for you to have. And so, because you're disidentified with the thinking, the more and more useful and positive thoughts that you create, this then gradually also starts to raise the mood. So your emotions start to improve as well. That then over time alters your perception of yourself and your self-image and reality. This then makes it less likely that you need to use coping mechanisms, because now these emotions and these experiences are not as overwhelming. Then you start to feel like you have more power and you don't feel as guilty. And so now you create a new cycle of positivity instead of negativity. So to recap, you don't have to, so you are not your thoughts, you are the point of awareness. You are not your emotions, you are the observer of them. You can still feel them, of course, but they are not you. So by either accepting or rejecting thoughts, you remind yourself you can choose to believe or not believe them. This then will change your mood and will change the cycle. So that's exactly what I did. The key to understand here, though, is it doesn't happen overnight. I did this for like 3 months, every single day non-stop. It was difficult at first, of course, because when you're stuck in this cycle and identified with it, it's very, very difficult to break out. So persistence is the key. So just keep at it by accepting, rejecting the thoughts, choosing to believe or not believe them, replacing them with more useful, positive thoughts. As you start to break the cycle, you'll start to notice that you start spiraling upwards now instead of downwards. So another thing to point out is not everyone is going to think in this way. So the way I've said that we are the point of awareness, we can observe thoughts, I do recognize that not everybody has an internal dialogue, and not everybody can necessarily easily observe their thoughts as well. I know that some people have visual images that occur, some people have more intuitive impressions, some people are definitely more feeling based, so they recognize their feelings more than what's going on in their mind. So if you don't readily and easily see your thoughts straight away, but you know that you kind of do have a negative thinking going on from the feelings that you're getting or other types of impression, like visual impressions, I can suggest that if you're not able to create that internal dialogue, which is replacing positive thoughts, I can suggest writing them down or I can suggest you verbally speak out to yourself. So you may have to find time later on. Like I guess you don't want to talk out loud in public, for example. So you can choose maybe to do this exercise verbally or with someone else. So you can find ways to verbalize your thoughts, but to make them more positive. I suggest writing them down and then reading them back. I think that's probably the best way of doing it. So yeah, think about how you think as well. So I'm probably quite lucky. I think in like all of the different ways, but I know that some people will be very good at one way, not so good at the other way. So the other thing that will help in breaking this loop and using this technique of accepting or rejecting your thoughts and not just believing them are going to be things like meditation, mindfulness, and also breathing exercises. So the reason why breathing, mindfulness, and meditation works is because it constantly reminds you that you are this point of awareness. So it brings you back to the present moment and out of your thinking mind, out of it takes you out of the identification with the cycle, with the thoughts and with the emotions. But what will really help, because a lot of depression comes from something else. So what will really help is really understanding where the issues are coming from. So what the underlying issues are. So you can be doing this cycle, but I find it will only get you through the worst symptoms first. So this is not a technique to completely get rid of depression, no, because there will be other layers to it as well. So you will need to look into what is the root cause of that depression. So I've done a video on that already. So I've talked about the root cause of depression, but ultimately there will be a situation either in the present or in the past that you'll have to work to resolve. So for me, for example, I had to resolve the dissociative symptoms of depersonalisation and personal issues first before I could get fully out of depression. But if you use this technique, this changed my life at the time 10 years ago, where when you get stuck in this cycle, it feels like it's impossible to break, but it's only because we become identified with these things. So once you learn to disidentify and to accept or reject these thoughts, you don't have to believe the thoughts. And when you persist with it, it took me a couple of months, you might be quicker, but persist with it, and you will start to see some major changes in how you perceive yourself and the world. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.